I pulled her close and felt her desire. The alien woman couldn't speak. The silent encounter transport shuttle touched down on Valoria's crimson soil. Just as the planet's twin suns began their descent, Dr. Marcus Reed stepped onto the landing platform, breathing in air that tasted faintly of copper and something sweetly floral. 3 months he'd been granted to study the bioluminescent ecosystems of this uncharted world, and he intended to make every moment count. By the time he'd set up his research station near the Singing Cliffs, so named for the haunting sounds wind made through their hollow formations, darkness had fallen completely. But Valoria's night was far from black. The vegetation pulsed with inner light, creating a landscape of moving shadows and ethereal glows. Marcus activated his scanner and headed toward the cliff edge, where preliminary surveys had detected the densest concentration of luminescent plant life. The path wound downward, and soon he heard the gentle sound of water. A natural pool, fed by an underground spring, glimmered in a small clearing. Then he saw her. She stood waist deep in the water, her back to him, and Marcus froze. Her skin held a pearlescent quality, catching the ambient light and reflecting it in subtle waves. Her hair, dark as the space between stars, fell past her shoulders. She moved with fluid grace, cupping water in her palms and letting it cascade over her shoulders. Marcus knew he should retreat, but his feet wouldn't obey. Perhaps she sensed his presence, or maybe she'd known he was there all along. She turned slowly, and their eyes met across the clearing. Her face was stunning in its unfamiliarity, features that were almost human, yet distinctly otherworldly. But it was her eyes that held him captive, large and luminous, reflecting the bioluminescent pool with an inner light of their own. Her skin began to shimmer, patterns of soft amber light rippling across her shoulders and arms like silent words. He couldn't yet read. She didn't seem afraid. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same curiosity he felt. When she moved toward the pool's edge, Marcus found himself stepping closer as well. Drawn by something he couldn't name, she emerged from the water, and though he tried to be respectful, Marcus couldn't help but notice how the droplets caught the light on her skin, each one a tiny prism. She wore minimal clothing, woven from some plant fiber that glowed faintly. She raised one hand, palm forward, in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Marcus mirrored the gesture, his heart pounding. The amber patterns on her skin shifted to a warm gold, and somehow, he understood. She wasn't hostile, she was welcoming him. Learning her language, Marcus returned to his research station that night, unable to sleep, his mind replaying every moment of the encounter. The woman he didn't even know her name had watched him for several minutes before gracefully disappearing into the forest, leaving only fading light patterns in her wake. The next evening, he came prepared. He brought a small solar lantern, some dried fruit from his supplies, and a notebook filled with preliminary sketches of Valorian plant life. He didn't know if she'd return, but something told him she would. She emerged from the shadows just after moonrise, moving silently through the undergrowth. This time, she wore a different garment, something that draped across one shoulder and left the other bare, allowing her skin's natural luminescence to shine through. When she saw him, her skin bloomed with that same golden glow that Marcus offered the fruit tentatively. She approached, close enough that he could smell something like night-blooming flowers emanating from her. She took a piece, examined it curiously, then tasted it. The golden light intensified, and she made a sound, not quite a laugh, but something musical and pleased. Over the following nights, they developed a rhythm. Marcus would arrive with small offerings or tools from his world. She would teach him about hers, pointing to plants and creatures, then touching her skin where different colors would bloom. He began to understand. Gold meant happiness, deep blue signified thoughtfulness, soft green indicated peace. On the 5th night, everything changed. Marcus had been sketching her in his notebook, trying to capture the way light moved across her features. She moved behind him, looking over his shoulder with innocent curiosity. When she leaned closer to see the drawing, her hair brushed his neck, and an involuntary shiver ran through him. She noticed immediately. Her skin flickered through several colors: surprise, curiosity, then something new, a soft rose pink, like dawn light, began spreading across her shoulders and down her arms. She moved to face him, kneeling close. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for his hand. Marcus let her take it, his breath catching as she pressed his palm against her wrist. Beneath his fingers, he felt a pulse rapid, matching his own. The skin there bore an intricate pattern of darker markings, almost like a tattoo. Her eyes widened, and the rose color deepened to something richer. She placed her other hand on his chest, directly over his heart, feeling its rhythm accelerate. For a long moment, they stayed frozen in that position, two beings from different worlds discovering that desire needed no translation. When she finally pulled back, her skin was dancing with multiple colors, rose and gold, and something like deep violet he hadn't seen before. She touched her own chest, then pointed to him, then made a gesture bringing her hands together. Marcus understood. Whatever this was between them, she felt it too. The growing bond. 12 weeks into his research, Marcus had abandoned any pretense that his nightly excursions were purely scientific. His official reports mentioned the bioluminescent flora, the unique mineral compositions, the fascinating ecosystem. They said nothing about Lyra, the name she'd conveyed by touching certain plants in sequence, their sounds creating something close to that word. She'd grown bolder in her interactions, often initiating contact now. She would take his hand to guide him through the forest, showing him hidden waterfalls and caves filled with crystalline formations. Each touch lingered longer than necessary, and Marcus found himself inventing excuses to reciprocate. But he'd also learned something troubling. In all their explorations, they'd never encountered another Valorian. The settlements his orbital scans had detected remained distant and unreachable. Whenever he gestured toward them questioningly, Lyra's skin would flash deep red, the color he'd come to associate with prohibition or danger. Tonight, she arrived later than usual, her skin dim, the colors muted. Marcus immediately sensed something was wrong. She took both his hands and pulled him to his feet, her eyes urgent. She led him deeper into the forest than they'd ever gone, moving quickly, checking over her shoulder repeatedly. Marcus's heart raced. Was she in danger, was he? But he trusted her completely, following without question. They emerged in a grove he'd never seen on any of his scans. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle, their branches intertwining overhead to create a living cathedral. The ground was carpeted with flowers that glowed in shifting patterns, and in the center stood a raised platform of smooth stone. Lyra turned to face him, her skin alive with color, gold and rose, and that deep violet that made his stomach tighten. She touched the stone platform, then looked at him with an expression that needed no translation. This place was sacred, and she'd brought him here. She stepped onto the platform and extended her hand. Marcus took it and joined her. The flowers around them seemed to respond, their light pulsing in rhythm. Lyra began to move, swaying gently, and he understood she wanted him to follow. They danced without music, their only rhythm the synchronized glow of the flowers and their own heartbeats. She moved closer until barely any space remained between them, her skin's warmth radiating against him. When she placed both palms flat against his chest, Marcus covered them with his own hands. The violet in her skin deepened, spreading down her arms where he touched her. She looked up at him, and in her luminous eyes, he saw everything she couldn't say in words: longing, fear, hope, desire. Marcus lifted one hand to trace the light patterns on her shoulder, following their path across her collarbone. She trembled slightly, her lips parting, skin blazing with color. She responded by sliding her hands up to his shoulders, pulling him closer. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling, existing in a moment where two worlds collided and became one. The revelation: Marcus woke in his research station to find Lyra waiting outside, something he'd never seen before. She always came at night, never in daylight, but there she stood in the crimson dawn, her skin pale and flickering with erratic patterns, colors he'd never seen her display. Chaotic and distressed, he rushed out immediately. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength and pulled him toward the forest. Her skin flashed urgent orange and that deep red of warning. Something was desperately wrong. She led him to a cave system he'd marked on his surveys, but never explored. Inside, the walls were covered in ancient paintings, images of Valorians in various scenes of daily life, celebrations, and something else: families, children, So many children. Lyra's skin pulsed with deep blue as she moved along the wall, touching each painting reverently. Then she brought him to the final section, and Marcus's breath caught. The paintings here were recent, the pigments still vibrant. They showed Valorians lying still, their bodies dim and lifeless. Lyra touched each one, and her skin flickered with grief-deep indigo threaded with black, colors that made Marcus's chest ache in sympathy. She pointed to the paintings, then to herself, then held up her hand with fingers extended. 5. She was one of 5. Marcus pulled out his medical scanner, and Lyra didn't resist when he ran it over her. The readings confirmed his worst fear: her people were suffering from severe genetic degradation, likely from generations of isolated inbreeding. The population had collapsed to critical levels, but there was more. Lyra took his hand and placed it over her abdomen, her skin glowing with soft gold beneath his palm. The scanner picked up something unusual. Her reproductive system showed markers of compatibility, far broader than should be possible for such a specialized species. She led him deeper into the cave, to a final chamber where the oldest paintings resided. These were different, cruder but powerful. They showed a Valorian woman and a figure that was clearly not Valorian. The artist had painted it in different colors, different proportions. The two figures stood together, hands joined, and around them, small figures played. Children of both worlds. Marcus stared at the ancient prophecy made visible. His hands trembled as he turned to Lyra. "You knew," he whispered. "From the first night, you knew." She touched his face gently, her skin rippling with rose and violet and gold. She'd known, or at least hoped. The prophecy spoke of an outsider who would come when her people needed salvation most. Someone who could love across the boundaries of species and bring new life to a dying world. Lyra pulled something from a pouch at her waist, a small crystalline vial containing luminescent liquid. She held it up to the light, and Marcus recognized it from his botanical surveys. A rare flower extract, one his analysis had flagged as having remarkable genetic properties. She pressed the vial into his hand, then took his other hand and placed it over her heart. Her skin blazed with every color at once: hope, fear, desire, desperation, and above all, something that looked unmistakably like love. Marcus understood what she was asking, what she was offering. A chance to save her people, yes, but more than that. A chance to build something entirely new, a bridge between worlds, born from genuine connection rather than mere necessity. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her trembling form. Against his chest, he felt her heartbeat racing, her skin warm and alive with possibility. When she looked up at him, her eyes were luminous with unshed tears. Marcus kissed her forehead gently, then her cheeks, tasting the salt of her tears. She responded by pressing closer, her hands sliding around his waist, holding him as though he might disappear. The colors on her skin stabilized into that deep violet he'd come to recognize as her deepest desire. In that cave, surrounded by the legacy of her people and the promise of their future, Marcus made his choice. The choice. 3 days had passed since the revelation in the cave, and Marcus had barely slept. His shuttle's communication array blinked with incoming messages from the Research Council, demanding updates and preliminary findings. His contracted return date was 2 weeks away. He'd spent those 3 days analyzing every piece of data, running simulations, consulting his medical databases. The science supported what the ancient paintings had suggested. Genetic compatibility was possible, perhaps even likely, but possibility wasn't certainty, and the weight of an entire species' survival pressed heavily on his shoulders. Lyra hadn't visited since that day in the cave. Marcus understood she was giving him space to decide, but her absence felt like a physical ache. On the 4th night, he went to the pool where they'd first met. He didn't have to wait long. She emerged from the forest, her skin subdued, flickering with anxious blue and tentative gold. She'd given him time. Now she needed an answer before Marcus could speak. The forest around them suddenly filled with light. Figures emerged from the shadows, other Valorians, their skin glowing with wary orange and protective red. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, watching, waiting. An older Valorian, her skin marked with intricate patterns that suggested age and authority, stepped forward. Her colors were deep and serious: navy blue, dark purple. She looked at Marcus with clear intelligence and judgment, then at Lyra. Lyra's skin flashed with defiant gold. She moved to stand beside Marcus, taking his hand openly before her people. The statement was clear. This was her choice, regardless of their approval. The elder approached slowly. She studied Marcus with disconcerting intensity, then did something unexpected. She touched her own chest, then pointed to Lyra, then made a cradling gesture. She was asking about children, about the future. Marcus squeezed Lyra's hand and made his decision. He knelt and placed his scanner on the ground, a symbolic gesture of leaving behind his role as mere observer. Then he stood and performed the gestures Lyra had taught him over their weeks together. He touched his heart, then hers, then brought his hands together in the Valorian symbol of union. Lyra's skin exploded with brilliant gold, rose, and violet. She turned to him, her eyes shining, and for the first time, she opened her mouth and struggled to form sounds in his language. Mar, cuss, she whispered, the syllables awkward but unmistakable. His name, spoken in her voice for the first time, his heart nearly burst. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deeply and thoroughly, pouring every ounce of his decision into that kiss. She responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, her skin blazing so brightly that the entire clearing lit up like daylight. When they finally parted, the other Valorians' colors had shifted to warm golds and approving greens. The elder stepped forward again and placed her hands on both their shoulders, a blessing. Marcus realized. That night, Marcus sent his final transmission to the Research Council. He reported his findings on the bioluminescent ecosystems, attached his comprehensive data files, and then added a personal note. He would not be returning on the scheduled shuttle. He'd found something far more important than research, a purpose, a people who needed him, and a love that transcended the boundaries of worlds. Lyra led him to a dwelling her people had prepared, a beautiful structure woven from living trees and glowing vines. Inside, she turned to him with her skin painting stories of hope across every inch of her body. Marcus pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her against him, the rapid beat of her heart matching his own. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the scientific uncertainties, the cultural adjustments, the weight of expectation they would face them together, she whispered his name again, clearer this time, and he responded by tracing the luminescent patterns on her skin, learning the map of her body as she learned his. Their union that night was more than physical desire. It was a promise, a beginning, and perhaps the salvation of an entire world. Under Valoria's twin moons, two species became one, and the ancient prophecy began its transformation from myth to reality. The end.